Strategy. Uh, we have two of the speakers on
I'm
site
not
and two
hearing
of our
anything.
panelists
I'm not
online.
hearing anything.
I'd like to welcome you all. To start with, we will be to give you just a. We'll be starting with the opening remarks, and then we'll go for the second round of
They can
questions.
hear me.
So I'd like to request Monica to start with her opening remarks along with her introduction, uh, and then we'll go for the second round of questions.
Okay, yes. So can you hear me okay? Yes? All right. First of all, thank you for the forum organizers for continuing to put together this summit on really such critical issues related to digital governance. I'm really excited to be here, at least online. And I also want to thank Paola Galvez for really bringing all of us from across the world together, whether virtually or in person. So as a brief introduction, I'm Dr. Monica Lopez, and I come from a technical background. So I'm trained in the cognitive and brain sciences, and I've been in the intersecting fields of human intelligence, machine intelligence, human factors, and system safety now for 20 years. I'm an entrepreneur and the CEO and co-founder of Cognitive Insights for Artificial Intelligence, and I essentially work with product developers and organizational leadership at large to develop robust risk management framework from a human-centered perspective. I'm also an AI expert on scaling responsible AI for the Global Partnership on AI, so I certainly do recognize many individuals. So as for my contribution, I really do hope to complement the group here. I'm coming from the private sector perspective. So certainly, as we all know, today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, we know that algorithms have essentially become the invisible architects, perhaps we can call that, of our social, economic, and political experiences. And so what we have are very complex mathematical models designed to process information and make decisions, many times fully automated, that now essentially underpin every aspect of our lives. And as we all well know at this point, from job recruitment to financial services to criminal justice and social media interactions. And so this promise of technological neutrality essentially masks a reality, one where algorithmic systems are not objective, but instead they are essentially reflections of the biases, the historical inequities, and the systemic prejudices that are across our societies. And so they are essentially embedded in the design and training of data. And so this, as we all know, as well as this has direct human rights implications of algorithmic bias that are profound at this point and really far-reaching. And these systems essentially perpetuate and amplify these existing inequalities and are creating digital mechanisms of exclusion that are systematically disadvantaging marginalized communities. And so just very quick, before I enter into why we need a human-centered perspective on this, but I'm sure very clear examples that you may be familiar with already are with facial recognition technology, or FRT, and that they have demonstrated significantly higher error rates for women and people of color. We continue to see that problem. AI-driven hiring algorithms that have shown to discriminate against candidates based on gender, on race, and other protected characteristics. And AI-enabled criminal justice risk assessment tools, and we've certainly seen this. I'm based in the United States, and so we've shown that it has continued to perpetuate racial biases, leading to more severe sentencing recommendations for Black defendants compared to white defendants with similar backgrounds. So essentially, why do we have this? And the root of these challenges really lies in the fundamental nature of algorithmic development. And we know that machine learning models are trained on historical data that inherently reflect, as I mentioned earlier, these societal biases, power structures, and systemic inequalities. And I want you to take a moment right now to consider what a data point even means. How a single data point has limits. As those of you know, for those who work closely with data on a daily basis, and by that I mean whether you're collecting it, whether you're cleaning it, analyzing it, making conclusions from it, You know that the basic methodology of data is such that it systematically leaves out all kinds of information. And why? Because data collection techniques, they have to be repeatable across vast scales, and they require standardized categories. And while repeatability and standardization make data-based methods powerful, we have to acknowledge that they have power as a price. So it limits the kind of information we can collect. So when these models are then deployed without any sort of critical examination, they don't just reproduce existing inequities, they actually normalize and scale them. And so here is where I would argue, and I know the rest of the panel will continue to discuss this, but why a human-centered approach to algorithmic development offers essentially a critical, at this point, pathway to addressing these systemic challenges. And essentially what this means is that we need to reimagine technology as a tool for empowerment and well-being instead of a tool for exclusion. And so in this regard, prioritizing human rights, equity, and meaningful inclusion in every single step of technological design through implementation. And by that, I mean across the entire AI lifecycle becomes essential. And so I work with a lot of clients, as I mentioned earlier, I am in the private sector, and there are key strategies right now that are very clear that we know that we can advance this human-centered approach. And I'll just briefly mention 5 of them just real quick. So first is we need comprehensive diversity across algorithmic development. I'm sure you've been hearing that a lot, but the problem is that the transformative change has not really begun. And we know that if we diversify teams, we do get more responsible development of algorithmic systems. We do get new perspectives at the table. And so I would say that's absolutely essential no matter what moving forward. The second element is rigorous algorithmic auditing and transparency. Again, that is another element that we have seen. It is now a part, in fact, in part related to the European Union's AI Act, and a requirement. But what we need is we need to see this across the 3 perspectives of equality, equity, and justice. And this is not just for big tech companies to be engaging in. This is truly for everyone. And we know that irrespective of emerging legal requirements in some jurisdictions and some where there isn't much work happening on the legal side, all organizations must implement mandatory algorithmic impact assessment that thoroughly examine the potential discriminatory outcomes before deployment. And then, not just that, but continuously monitor those outcomes as more data are collected and models drift. And I have noticed that when companies do that, whether they're small or medium-sized or large, we do see better outcomes. A third element is the establishment of proactive bias mitigation techniques. Now, there are all sorts of technical strategies for that. Some of them are based essentially on what I was mentioning in regards to you really need to think about what data means. So careful curation of the training data. We need to make sure it truly is representative and balanced across the data sets. It does matter and it does change outcomes. Implementation of fairness constraints. Also, the development of testing protocols that actually specifically examine the potential for discriminatory outcomes. We know that when you identify that beforehand and you actually look for that, you will see it and you can actually mitigate change and actually improve on the issue. The fourth element is, of course, the classic need for legal and regulatory frameworks. And so here, I can't stress enough at this point that governments and international bodies, we have to truly come up with comprehensive regulatory frameworks that treat algorithmic discrimination as a fundamental human rights issue. And from a business perspective, what this means is that there needs to be clear legal standards for algorithmic accountability. There also need to be very clear mechanisms for individuals to be able to challenge algorithmic decisions. There certainly are not enough. And even in some cases where we have the requirement for companies to actually put on their website their auditing results, that is still not enough. And then, of course, we need significant penalties for those systems. And then the last issue, which is the fifth, is that we need ongoing community engagement. I also cannot stress that inclusion does matter and it requires continuous dialogue with communities most likely to be impacted by algorithmic systems. And this is not an easy task. It's a lot to ask for, but we know, and I've seen it with companies that actually make concerted efforts to create participatory design processes across the AI lifecycle. And that essentially means you're establishing relevant feedback mechanisms of communications as you create and design these systems, you pilot them, and you work with those individuals. And then you essentially end up empowering marginalized communities to actually want to actively provide their input because it is of value. So what I'm calling for here, essentially to conclude, is that we need this fundamental reimagining of technological innovation. We know at this point that algorithms are not neutral tools, but they're very powerful social mechanisms that either perpetuate or challenge existing power structures. So if we change now our methods, and every single one of us in the design and deployment choices of today, then I think we will very profoundly actually shape the future of human rights in the digital age in a very positive way. And so I look forward to your questions, and I know we're going to discuss this more in detail. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Monica, for all your thoughts. And I think you have also covered the second part of the questions already. My apologies, I should have mentioned the time before. So I'll go to Paula to give a short introduction. And for the first round, let's wrap within 5 minutes. And then like we go for a second round of question. For Monica, I think we'll be going a bit short on second round. She have covered almost most of the things. So Paula, over to you.
Thank you, Ananda. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to this very, very critical conversation. I'd like to start by posing a question. What does it take to make society more inclusive? My interest in social impact began early, inspired in part by my grandfather, who is a judge in the Central Highlands of Peru, who often spoke about societal disparities he witnessed. I went to law school, believing it would really equip me with the tools to drive meaningful change in a country with high levels of inequalities and social disparities, like is Peru, where I'm from. But my first year lacked inspiration at all. I think my courses were disconnected from real world problems. But my perspective really changed in 2013 when I began an internship in Microsoft. I was looking at the demonstration video of Seeing AI prototype. It was 10 years ago, but it was this project that used artificial intelligence and helped the visually impaired perceive their surroundings. That opened my eyes, that really showed me the profound potential that this technology can be as a catalyst for social good. So I said, I can really help as a lawyer to help leverage this technology as a force for inclusion, and I can use public policy and help drive human-centric and evidence-based policy. And that's when my commitment started to transform Peru into a more inclusive and digital society. And I think that's the path that led me to what I'm doing now, and I hopefully hope beyond. So I worked in the private sector for a long time. I was in the position that Dr. Monica Lopez was mentioning how private sector does. Then I received a proposition from the government to work there to help them with the national AI strategy and the digital skills strategy. And most of my friends told me, you're going to be so frustrated. The bureaucracy is going to kill you. Come on, you're used to Microsoft, big techs. But I said, no, I can actually bring and shed a light on disruptive ways to govern. So I decided to do it. I'm a firm believer on participatory bottom-up processes. So first thing I did was form a multi-stakeholder committee to do this policy. And well, we're here at IGF, a global forum. We're talking about AI and data at a global level. And I have seen firsthand a local experience bringing civil society, academia, private sector together to find solution on challenges. And one of the most challenges things that is AI policy. And I do believe that protecting democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and establishing clear guardrails on AI is a shared responsibility that a government alone cannot do, not a private sector company nor academia. It is an endeavor that must be taken in a multi-stakeholder approach. But I do think that one stakeholder is crucial in this pursuit, and that is youth civil society. The youth must be included, and youth engagement is a critical area that we need to protect now. That's what I believe in these first remarks, and I wanted to mention, because I do see generative AI producing fake and biased synthetic content, large language models reinforcing polarization, poorly designed AI-powered applications that are not compatible with assisting technologies, leading to discrimination against youth with disabilities. And I have the expert here. Yona will mention more about that. But apart from that, I sincerely believe that AI holds immense potential as a technology if we use it wisely. AI systems can break down language barriers. I mean, if IGF is as powerful as it is, and the youth IGF and youth seek of internet society is powerful if we are a community of more than 2,000 youth connected, and sometimes we use translation that is powered by AI, so that's powerful. Or, of course, making resources more accessible to diverse youth populations. Sadly, AI has yet to live up to its potential. Dr. Monica Lopez mentioned most of its challenges, who I absolutely agree with. AI is reproducing the society's bias. It is deepening inequalities. Someone heard, I heard someone saying, but that's just the way the world is. The world is biased, Paola. What do you think? That's what AI is going to do. And yes, that's true, but I agree at one point that it depends on us how we want to develop this technology. It depends on us, the results that this technology is going to provide as an output, because data is the oxygen of AI, and transparency should be at its core. So it's up to us to shape the future of AI now, to talk about the data that should be more representative, and the focus on IGF of bringing youth to the discussion, I think it's a great tool to really congratulate, because we have a big youth community in this IGF. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and up to you, Ananda.
Thank you so much, Paula, for touching a bit of how powerful it can be, and the work of your government bringing a multi-stakeholder committee was really commendable. I'd like to go with Yona Waker to give. I'll also give you 5 minutes to briefly introduce you and touch upon the base that Dr. Monica and Paula has set up. On. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to go back to Riyadh. 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to curate the Global AI Summit of AI for the Good of Humanity, and we continued this movement. I'm a visiting lecturer for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but also I'm envoy and ambassador of EU projects to MENA region, and my goal is to bring all of these voices and ideas to actual policies, let's say EU AI Act or Code of Practice. And today I specifically would love to address how it may affect the most vulnerable groups. And as Paula mentioned, individuals with disabilities. And that's why I would love to quickly share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. So 28 countries signed the agreement about AI safety, including not only Western countries, but the countries of the global south, Nigeria, Kenya, countries of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And the big question, how these actual frameworks can address designated and vulnerable groups. For instance, currently there is a 1 billion people, it's 15% of the world live with disabilities, according to the World Health Organization. And it's important to understand that sometimes these disabilities are invisible. Let's say neurodisabilities, at least 1 in 6 people living with one or more neurological conditions. And it's actually a very complex task to bring all of these things to the frameworks. And let's say why For EU, we have a whole combination of laws and frameworks. We address classifications in taxonomies in Accessibility Act and Standardization Directive. We are trying to address manipulation and addictive design at the level of AI Act, Digital Services Act, GDPR. We're trying to understand and identify high risks for systems related to certain critical infrastructure, transparency risks, prohibiting particular use of affective computing. But still, it's not enough because we need to understand how many systems we actually have, how many cases we have. And for instance, for assistive technologies, we have over 120 technologies for the recent OECD report, and I had opportunity to contribute to this report. We use AI to augment smart wheelchairs, walking sticks, geolocation, and city tools. We use AI to support hearing impairment using computer vision to turn sign language into text. We support cognitive accessibility, including ADHD, dyslexia, autism. But we also should understand all the challenges which are coming with the AI, including recognition errors, then individuals with facial differences or asymmetry, craniofacial syndrome, just not properly identified by facial recognition system, as was mentioned by my colleague, or cues identification errors, then individuals can understand AI interface. They can hear or see the signal, or when they deal with excluding patterns and errors or exclusion by generative AI and language-based models. Also, we have all the complexity driven by different machine learning techniques, supervised learning, which are connected to errors induced by humans, unsupervised learning, which brings all the errors and social disparities from the history, or reinforcement learning, which is limited by training environments, including robotics and assistive technologies. And finally, we should understand that AI is not limited by software, it's also about hardware. It's about human centricity of the physical devices, it's about safety, motion and sensing component safety, power components and environmental safety, production and training cycle. So overall, working on disability-centered AI is not just about words. It's extremely complex process of building environments where we have a multimodal and multisensory approach. When we deal with the families, caregivers, patients, and different type of users, then they try to understand and identify scenarios of misuse, actions and non-actions, so-called omission, potential manipulation, or addictive design. So it's why the next level of AI safety institutes, offices, and oversight will include all of these comprehensive parameters. When we talk not only about a risk-based approach, but understanding different scenarios, workplaces, education, law enforcement, immigration. We think about taxonomies, frameworks, and accidents repositories, working with UN, World Health Organization, UNESCO, OECD, and finally, we try to understand the intersectionality of disabilities, thinking about children and minors, women and girls, and all the complexity of history behind these systems and context. Thank you.
Thank you, Yona, for your wonderful things, how AI could be used in assistive technologies, but there are challenges like very minor issue might also be a hinder. We cannot accept a minimal level of error in the use of like AI in healthcare system. We'll come back to you on these questions. So I'll ask Avir to talk about herself, and I'll give you 5 minutes as well. Please introduce yourself and with the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a privilege to be part of this discussion, and I would like also to thank Paula for initiating this and kickstarting it. I'd like to thank the rest of the panel and the moderators as well, and the event organizers. Just to introduce myself briefly, this is Abir Sumait. I'm a public policy expert with a little over a decade of experience in cybersecurity, ICT regulation, and data governance. in the Saudi government. I hold a master's degree in public policy from Oxford University and a Bachelor of Science in Computer and Information Sciences. My interest lies in shaping inclusive and sustainable digital policies that drive innovation and advance the digital economy. I would like to briefly just start the conversation of this session by mentioning examples that show while algorithms and AI promise efficiency and innovation, they have the power to replicate and amplify suicidal inequalities when not governed responsibly. The first example I would like to mention is from France. In France, the welfare agency used an algorithm to detect fraud in welfare and errors in payments. And this algorithm, while in text was a wonderful idea, in practice it ended up impacting specific segments of its population and marginalized groups, specifically single parents and individuals with disabilities, far more than any others. It ended up flagging them more as high risk more frequently than the rest of the beneficiaries of the system. So this impact was profound on those individuals. It led to more investigations, a lot of more stress, and in some cases even suspension of benefits. So in October of this year, a coalition of human rights organizations launched legal actions against the French government for this algorithm used by the welfare agencies, arguing that this algorithm actually violates the privacy laws and anti-discrimination regulations. So this case shows us the reminder of how risks can be inherent in some opaque systems and maybe poorly governed AI tools. Another example I would like to quickly highlight in the healthcare sector, where a study in 2019 from Pennsylvania University highlighted an AI-driven healthcare system that was used to allocate medical resources for a little over 200 million patients. And that system relied on historical healthcare expenditure as a proxy for healthcare need. So this algorithm was not considering the systematic disparity in healthcare access and spending in society at that time, and it ended up resulting in black patients being less likely to be flagged for need of enhanced care to a percent that reached 50% than their white counterparts. So even though this algorithm and this system was intended to streamline healthcare delivery, it ended up perpetuating inequality and deepening distrust in AI systems and in technology overall. So this example will underscore one undeniable truth, that algorithms are not neutral when built on biased data or flawed assumptions. And it might lead to amplified existing injustices and exacerbate exclusion, often impacting the most vulnerable population. These challenges and these issues generated actions from governments on an international level and a national level, one of which, as mentioned by Dr. Lopez, the EU AI Act that entered force this year. And it classifies AI systems based on risk, classifying things such as welfare, employment, and healthcare as areas of high risk, where a very high standards of transparency, quality, and human intervention is required. A lot of nations and governments followed suit, I believe. One example for that is here in my country, in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority, established a few years ago, started or adopted recently the AI ethics principles that emphasizes transparency, fairness, and accountability. Therefore, I believe governments play a very important role, while every actor and every player is really important in these discussions and conversations. Governments have critical roles in regulating and establishing responsibility and advancing the way forward for AI adoption in an equitable and fair way. Thank you.
Thank you, Abir. So I'll come back to Dr. Monica. You have touched over the how algorithm bias are there and what could be the role of private sector, I'll like to touch you upon what are the measures that private sector could take to overcome those biases, along with the role of other stakeholders. And if there are any best practices that could be shared, kindly share. And I'll ask you to wrap very sooner. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And I know I briefly mentioned some of them, but I think I'll right now highlight some that, in fact, many of our the fellow colleagues have been already, in fact, mentioning. So the first one, and one that is starting to happen, but not to the extent that I believe should happen more, is the whole question of diversity in teams. Again, we hear this a lot. We hear that we need to bring in different perspectives to the table. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, and I have seen even, startups, so small and medium-sized enterprises who make the argument, we don't have enough resources, we can't. And they actually do. And sometimes it's as simple as bringing the very customers, the very clients that they intend to be, that they intend for their product or their service to be for, to the discussion. So I would say that that is one very key element, and we just need to make that a requirement at this point. It needs to essentially be something a best practice, frankly, at this point. And the other one is the bias audits. We are seeing, certainly across legislation, the need for the requirement for, so one needs to comply now with providing audits for these systems, particularly on the topic of bias, so to ensure that they are non-discriminatory, non-biased. So that is a good thing. However, what ends up being the problem is that we haven't yet standardized the type of documentation, the type of metrics, and the benchmarks. So that is right now the conversation, at least in in not just in the private sector, but certainly also in academia, as to what should we, and at the I also I am in communication and work with individuals from IEEE, from ISO, who set the industry standards, and so this is a very big topic right now of debate as to how do we standardize what these audits should look like, and how do we make sure that not only we standardize that, but we actually have the right committees in place, experts who can then review this documentation. So I would say that that, in a way, while extremely important, sometimes does become a barrier of sorts, precisely because individuals, or organizations rather, companies don't know exactly what needs to be put into these audits. So that's the second element. And the third and final point here is the whole issue of transparency and explainability of these systems. We've heard many, many times about the black box nature of these systems, but to be quite honest, we know much more about these systems. Developers do know the data that is involved. We do make mathematical assumptions. So there's a lot of information at the very pre-beginning stage of data collection, of system creation, for which we have a lot of information about. And we're not necessarily being very transparent about that in the first place. So I would say that that in and of itself is extremely important, but also is becoming a type of best practice, because if you can establish that from the beginning, it does have downstream effect across the entire AI lifecycle, which then becomes extremely important when you start integrating the system. And let's say you have a problem, you have a negative outcome, as is, someone ends up being harmed, and then you can essentially reverse engineer back again if you had that initial very clear transparency put out in the beginning. We are starting to see some good practices around that, particularly around model cards, nutrition-like labels that have all been, especially in healthcare. There's examples given in healthcare. I do a lot of work with the healthcare industry, and so there's a very big push right now to essentially standardize and normalize nutrition-like labels around AI model transparency that I think then should be utilized across all systems, frankly, at this point, all contexts and domains.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Monica. So I'll go to Paula. I think after you guys complete, we can go to. So I'll go to Paula. That you have already worked on the AI readiness assessment for the country, and how countries and regions are making declarations, how it can be transitioned into the action, like based on your experience. Can you share, please?
Sure, and what you say, it's key, right? How to pass from declarations to actions. We've seen so many commitments already. So great call. Thank you for the question. I'd say first of all, we need to start by going into the international frameworks of AI. If there are countries that have not adopted, they will be left out. So that way, we ensure alignment with global standards, best practices, and that also helps with local business to join and be easy to go out the borders. This is first. But second, when we start formulating the national AI policies, we governments need to develop a structured and meaningful public participation process. This means receiving comments from all stakeholders, but it's not only that, because that happens a lot in my country, I can tell you. By law, they need to publish 30 days any regulation. Actually, it just happened. The second draft of the AI Act regulation was published. But what we need for a meaningful participation is government saying how they took this comment, and if they are not considering, why. I believe that the citizens and all the civil society organizations, the private sector commented, need to know what happened after they commented at any bill. Third, enhance transparency and accessibility. Any AI policy material must be readily accessible, complete, and accurate to the public. Then independent oversight, I think is a must. Ananda, creating or designating an independent agency. Here, Abir mentioned the Saudi Data and AI Agency. I think that is a very good example. Sometimes governments have a challenge with this because they say, it's huge amount of effort, people, resources, right? But if it's not possible having a new one, then let's think. Maybe the Data Protection Authority can take over AI capacities, right? Also, and I think this cannot be left behind, investment in AI policy, AI skills development. That's a must. We can have the best AI law, but if we don't help our people understand what is AI, how to read and know that the AI can hallucinate, we would be lost. So AI skills for the people is a must. And just to finish, always what I've said with a gender lens, because gender equity and diversity in AI is a must, something that is not being looked as it should be. You mentioned I conducted the AI readiness assessment methodology of UNESCO, and I'm proud to say that the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI is the only document at the moment that has a chapter on gender. And it must be reviewed because it's very comprehensive and it has practical policies that should be taken into consideration and into practice. And of course, environmental sustainability in AI policy should be considered. It is often overlooked. What is the impact on AI on the energy? Should we promote energy efficient AI solution? Definitely. Minimize carbon footprint, of course, and fostering sustainable practices. Because this is I will finish with this data, but when you send a question to a large language model, as we all know, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., it's the same consumption that an airplane has in a year from Tokyo to New York. So we should be thoughtful on what are we sending to AI, or maybe Google can do it for us too. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for your strong thoughts. I'll come back to Yona. You have mentioned about the AI in assistive technologies. So now I'll come back to how legal frameworks can complement on the assistive technologies while protecting the vulnerable population that are using those technologies. We have briefly underlined that minor error might be a major in case of assistive technologies. Over to you, Yona.
Yes. So first of all, we have a few main elements of these frameworks. The first one is related to taxonomies and repositories in cases. And here I would love to echo my colleagues, Dr. Monica and Paula. We actually need to involve all of the stakeholders. And for instance, cooperating with the OECD, we involved over 80 organizations to understand existing barriers of access to these technologies. Its affordability, its accessibility, its energy consumption, its safety, its adoption technique is the first thing. Second thing is the accuracy in original solutions. So one of the lessons we learned both working in EU and MENA region, we can't localize OpenAI. We can't localize Microsoft solutions, but we can build our own solutions, sometimes not large language models, but small language models, not with the 400 billion parameters, maybe with 5, 10, 15 billion parameters, but for more specific purposes or languages. For instance, when we've made the research for Hungarian language, we have 1,000 times less sources of training for ChatGPT in comparison to English. So we have a similar situation for many other non-English languages. It just doesn't work, not only from the regional perspective, but from scientific research and development perspective. Another thing is the dedicated safety models. Sometimes we can't fix all of the issues within the model, but we can build dedicated agents or additional solutions which track or improve existing systems. For instance, currently for the Commission, I evaluate a few companies and technologies which will address the privacy concerns, compliance with the GDPR, with the data leakages, breaches, and also online harassment, hate speech, and other parameters. It's also complemented with the safety environments and oversights. So it's the job of the government create so-called test beds and regulatory sandboxes. Is a kind of a specialized centers where startups can come to in order to test their AI model to make sure they're on one hand compliant and also they build actually safe systems. It specifically relates to areas of a so-called critical infrastructure, is the areas of health, education, smart cities, and for instance, Saudi Arabia is known for so-called cognitive cities. All these areas are a part of our work when we're trying to build efficient, resilient, and sustainable solutions. And finally, is a cooperation with intergovernmental organizations. So, for instance, we work on frameworks called digital solutions for girls with disabilities with UNICEF. We work with UNESCO on AI for children. So we're trying to reflect more specific scenarios, cases, and adoption techniques related to specific ages, let's say from 8 to 12 years old, or specific regions, or specific gender, including both specific of adoption, but also safety considerations, and even unique conditions or illnesses which are very specific to particular region. For instance, we have a very different statistic related to diabetes, craniofacial syndrome, different type of cognitive and sensory disabilities if we compare the MENA region in EU. So it's a very complex process. And as I've mentioned, now our policies becoming overlap. So even for privacy, for manipulation, for addictive design, we have an overlap not only in AI Act, but also for other frameworks, Digital Services Act, for data regulation. So some essential pieces of our vision exist in different frameworks. So all, even governmental employees are aware of it. And the final thing is AI literacy adoption. So we're working to improve the literacy of governmental workers and governors who will employ these policies and bring to the life.
Thank you, Yona, so much. So I'll come back to Avir. So we have been talking about complexity of making AI responsible, and when it comes to making responsible AI, it demands for ensuring accountability and transparency. While we are seeing many automated AI systems. Who will be responsible if automated car kills a man in the street? This has been kind of serious question, and there are other consequences. So in this context, how governments can ensure the responsible AI while ensuring the accountability and transparency? Kindly go through it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I think this question actually relates to what Dr. Lopez mentioned. Uh, the keywords here are transparency and explainability. Of course, for sure, regulations and law establish responsibilities and make it sure every actor involved in any event knows their role and knows when to be responsible, but also the fact that they can explain and they can be transparent at how they work and how they operate and how they might impact others and individuals, specifically vulnerable populations, is really key. And as Dr. Lopez mentioned, private sector knows more than maybe we understand, but we're not very clear on how we want the transparency and explainability to work. And maybe my thought on that is government should work hand in hand, should push for standardization to happen as soon as possible, should be clear in establishing the responsibility and be clear about what it is, what it means to have a requirement for transparency for AI and algorithms. One extra thing that I think government should also focus on is to establish a way for individuals to challenge such systems and impactful algorithms on their lives. So my idea is that there should be continuous evaluation and risk assessment of how it is actually working in the real life. In case any incident of bias or discrimination happens, there should be a clear way, clear procedure for individuals and for government to start auditing, reviewing any system that's in work and impacting lives of individuals.
Thank you, Abir. Maybe we'll come back to you going to the Q&A session. There is one contributor in our audience. I'll ask her to provide her, and then like Matilda will bring what we have in the discussions in the chat, and if there are any questions online, and we'll go to the question answer. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Mizna Al-Tureki, and I'm representing the Saudi Green Building Forum, which is a non-governmental and non-profit organization that supports and promotes green practices as well as decreasing carbon emissions and decreasing energy consumption. Of course, it contributes to the digital transformation that the world now is witnessing. And for that, I would like to just participate and give an idea that we're going through a critical perspective, which means that we're having, as algorithms offers an immense potential to enhance our daily lives, yet we face fundamental challenges relating to biases and exclusion. Now, many of these systems function as an opaque, as Dr. Monica said, lacking transparency, which of course perpetuates social disparities and exacerbates discrimination against marginalized communities. Now, in the absence of the proper scrutiny and accountability, algorithms sometimes contribute to human rights violation instead of addressing them. So what we should do about that as a civil society? We need to take an action, and we need to call for a greater transparency and accountability to ensure algorithms are open to scrutiny and include clear mechanisms for identifying and addressing biases. Of course, we need to integrate human rights into algorithm design, which means we need to focus on developing human-centered algorithms that prioritize the needs for marginalized groups. Of course, finally, we need to foster a multilateral collaboration to engage all stakeholders, as you all mentioned, to ensure algorithms are fair and inclusive, considering diverse cultural and social dimensions. Now, we recommend the following. First, we need to launch a global algorithmic transparency initiative that establishes an international platform to set standards for evaluating the impact for algorithms on human rights and promoting transparency. Second, design inclusive-oriented algorithms, which develops algorithmic tools that prioritize accessibility, improve service delivery for people with disabilities, and ensure greater inclusivity. And last but not least, implement training programs that builds capacity of developers and design makers to understand the risks of algorithms, bias, and address them effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, if we have any kind of question on site, there are no any online question, I believe. So, while asking question, please also mention whom you are asking to, so that it is easier to answer. Or if it is common, let it know as well.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, my name is Aaron Promise Mba, and I worked on this with Paola and all of you here. So I'm very excited because of the insights we've been sharing. So I have a question, and I would like Dr. Monica to help me address it. I understand where you talked about algorithms, helping for marketing and some other business, right? And then the kind of divide that comes with it, the risk that comes with it, that it can actually, amplify the digital divide, especially with persons with disabilities, right? And then I've worked with some persons with disabilities using social media and all of that. And then there's a particular case where I think Abe also mentioned something about depression, suicide, right? Suicide, right? So now you have someone click on Spotify to listen to a music. Maybe he's feeling down, and then after that you see Spotify recommending music, suicidal music, right? That kind of music. So how do we address this, right? And Paola also mentioned something about uh, sorry, let me get it. Standardization, right? Having a policy, and then countries are making declarations, right? So how to take action is how to take action on this. Then she talked about ownership, right? Public participation. Now, when you were talking, you talked about a particular policy that Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria, right? A particular policy that Nigeria had adopted. So I wanted to know, Nigeria has a lot of policies, even AI policy, right? We are always at the forefront of adopting when we look at other countries doing a lot of things, and then we start doing our own. And then we have a lot of those documents, but then there's no implementation and enforcement, right? So now how do we ensure that it's not just paperwork, right? We don't just do all of these policies and it's just decorate our shelves, that it's actually being enforced and then it's followed through until an implementation and all of that. So if you can share some of your insight about that, thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. Very complex. I mean, you really touched upon many, many aspects. But I think something that actually really stands out, and perhaps Paula, I think, had also mentioned this at one point, is that there really needs to be, I think, at this point, what makes. So let me backtrack a second. So yes, everybody's talking about regulation. Everybody's talking about standards, normalization. Everybody's talking about we need implementation. How do we do this enforcement? But I think part of the problem lies in we simply do not have enough public awareness and understanding. Because I think if we actually did have more of that, there would be more of a demand. And I see this in terms of, I mean, yes, we hear some even very tragic examples. So you did mention about, someone who has depression and may use Spotify and then get recommended different new types of music to apparently, quote unquote, improve or to fix, or, one has to be careful with the words one uses here, deal with that situation. And we've seen two recent even suicides as a result of chatbot use, because of an anthropomorphization of these systems. And I think it really goes back to this question of many times, many users, unfortunately, maybe most users, do not understand these systems fundamentally. That's an education issue. That's an education question, because if you know and understand, then you can critically evaluate these systems. You can be more proactive because you know what's wrong, or you see the gap, you see what needs to be improved. And so, and I say that as I'm also I didn't mention this, but I'm also in academia, and I do teach in the School of Engineering at Johns Hopkins University in the Washington, D.C., Maryland region in the United States. And I teach the courses on AI ethics and policy and governance to computer scientists and engineers. And I love when they come to the beginning of class with no awareness, and at the end, they're absolutely more engaged, and they all say, we want to go and be those engineers who can talk to policymakers. And so to me, that is very clear evidence, whether they're high schoolers, undergraduate students, professionals, working professionals go back to school, graduate students, whatever it is, I see this change. And it's changed because of the power of knowledge. So my main, really, my call here is we need far more incentivization to make much more educated users in everyone, all ages. Then we're going to see the need for, and I really think that because there's going to be that demand from companies that we want to ensure that our data is private. We want to ensure that we're not being harmed. We want to ensure that we actually have benefits from these technologies. I'll stop there. I think, yeah, others can add to it, I'm sure.
Hello. Thank you for Thank you, Monica, for your wonderful response. We have only 5 minutes left. I have been already one. So, Matilda, is there any online discussion or question or any contribution? No. Uh, if there is any question, please feel free, and contributions are also welcome. We have 5 minutes. Please keep the time in mind, both speakers and
Thank you. I'll be quick. This has been a great discussion. We do get this. The point on education is very well made, and we've realized, in our work, I work in New Delhi in India, and we've realized even with very specialized sectors of the population like judges and lawyers, it takes a lot of conversation, a lot of detailing to get to a point where something like bias that judges work with daily, for them to start to understand what bias in an AI system might look like. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when something requires such specialized and detailed understanding, then clearly the problem isn't with people not being able to understand. Maybe it's with the technology not being at a stage where it's readily explainable, where it's easily explainable for societal use. So is there any merit to, frequently we keep getting these discussions on maybe there's a need to pause, especially with technologies like deepfakes, which everyone who does research in this area knows are primarily going to be used for harm, not primarily, but massively going to be used for harmful ends. So is there any credence, or is there any currency to, pushing for a pause at certain levels, or are we way past that point already and we just have to mitigate now? That's a small question. Sorry if it's a little depressing, and yeah.
I think thank you so much for the question. If there are any questions, let's take it, and I'll give each speaker with 1 minute and then wrap it up. Any question, contribution from the floor? No, none from online. So each speaker can have 1 minute and respond. If not, they can proceed. Yeah. Okay. Like a just one-liner that you want to give for the wrap up. Thank you. Yeah, you can start with Abir maybe.
What an interesting question to end at. I think we'll just ponder about it. I don't think there is a real answer. Are we beyond that point? I don't think so. But should we pause? I also don't think so, to be honest. I think we can put on more effort into making technology more explainable and just bridging the gap little by little. And that's, I think, what everyone, every actor and every player should work towards. That's my thought on that.
Totally agree. Absolutely, we cannot pause, because if some group decide to do it, then some others will continue, and it is like just put a blanket in your eyes. So we cannot do it, but we can use what we have. And if our countries do not have a data protection law or an AI national strategy, we need to push for it to happen. Because if a country does not have the idea of how they want this technology to develop, what is the future of us as citizens? So I just leave this question for us, and let's reflect on how we can contribute to the future of AI.
Thank you, Paula. Now, Monica and Yona, please.
Yeah, I would agree absolutely with the both comments we can't pause, we can't ban. That's not going to work. Absolutely. We're moving far too fast anyway at this point. But I would say that where there's a will, there's a way. So if we all come to the agreement and acknowledgement that we need, and I mean all of us, not just those of us right now here and our colleagues, everyone, that we need to do this, then I think it's possible, and we need to act.
Yona, please.
Yes, I'm always on the positive side because finally we have all of the stakeholders together, and it includes also the European Commission. I would love to quickly respond to the question of Aaron about the keywords in suicides, because it's actually about awareness. Yes, because if you know that recommendation engines use so-called stop words, if you know how the history of these engines works, you can easily fix it through regulatory sandboxes. And emerging companies and startups just come into the centers, and you can provide the oversight to fix these issues. The same with the bias. Then you know that bias is not abstract category, but just the problem of under or over representation. Just bigger error for smaller groups is a purely data and mathematical things coming through society. You can clearly identify the issue. It can be technical issue, it can be social issue, and then you see it, you can fix it. And that's why now we have these tools, test beds, regulatory sandboxes, policy frameworks, and all the stakeholders working together to come up with the real life terms, understanding, and finally we can fix it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Yona. Thank you, all of our panelists, and thank you, Paula, for organizing this. To all of our on-site audience and audiences online. And this is not the end of the conversation. We have just begun it. You can just connect with our speakers in the LinkedIn or wherever you are. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all.
Can you just stay? Our